The global warming march. All right, global warming, climate change, the weather, it always changes. The interesting thing about that march, of course, is that like Occupy, there are no demands. I think it's because the demands that they would make would be so hated that they would be discredited and isolated more than they are. If you demand a carbon tax, you're saying to Joe Sixpack, you should pay more for gas. It's unacceptable. That's more austerity. We don't need it. Cap and trade is even worse in some ways because it says, let's give the Wall Street speculators, the hedge fund hyenas and zombie bankers, let's give them the ability to drive up the price of these carbon permits, and that's added to production. That's Waxman-Markey, passed by Pelosi. Don't let it ever become law. Or some of them will say, we want renewable energy, we want windmills, we want solar cells. Well, remember, the main windmill and solar cell companies, in particular the solar cell companies in U.S., Germany, China, have all gone bankrupt. They cannot survive. They're anti-economical. They require subsidies. Any form of cheap energy wipes them out. Right? If ITER works and we get thermonuclear fusion, they're out of business. They got to stop every modern nuclear reactor because that is cheaper. And remember, when you're talking about nuclear reactors, you got about 100 of them in the U.S., 103. They're getting dangerous because they're all built pre-Carter. So what do you need? Fourth generation, high temperature reactor, pebble bed reactor with all the safety controls. Now, if you don't like that, in some cases, there's really no alternative. For the base load in a recovery, you can forget windmills and solar cells. Otherwise, if you want to take the long view, ITER, Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, and the ITER thermonuclear fusion project in southern France. That's the future. Malthusian ideology is discredited. Go to Tarpley.net. Put in Ortes, O-R-T-E-S. Gianmaria Ortes, O-R-T-E-S, the Venetian kook. He invented carrying capacity. He invented the idea of the zero-sum game. It's a complete fake, and the British then switched into Malthusian mode after their project with the American Civil War failed. Remember Jevons and the peak coal thesis, right? So this is Malthusianism, right? This is what's wrong. Malthusianism was reintroduced in the U.S. big time, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72. It's the fruit of defeated anti-war movements, lots and lots of assassinations. Now, is it really warm? Well, there is some warming, right? There's global warming in that sense that there's some evidence, not the overwhelming evidence, but some evidence that things are getting warmer. But not as much as in medieval warm period, right? Go back to 1200, 1300. Why does Greenland get its name? Why is Greenland called Greenland? Well, because it was green. Is it green now? Not so much. How about Vineland? When Leif Erikson got there, he said, look at all the vines. It's Vineland. Is that Labrador, Newfoundland? Well, it's clear that things were much warmer then than they are now. Back in a minute. Final segment. I just wanted to give a sort of a summary package refutation to the worst mistakes fomented by Soros and company in the climate change movement. The main idea is carbon tax is unacceptable, cap and trade unacceptable, and windmills and solar cells are a joke. So you got to have some serious energy production, modern energy production. The medieval warm period, 1200, 1300. Greenland is called Greenland. It's not very green. It's an ice sheet today, but in those days there was enough green to make it green. They get around this by saying, oh, they did that as a form of advertising, right, to make you think it was green. I'm sorry. This is they're doing anything they can to dodge the obvious. And then Vineland, right? Why would the Vikings, the Northmen, call it Vineland? Well, because there were so many vines which are not found there today because it's too cold for them to be there year-round. The fact of the medieval warm period means that long before the anthropogenic carbon, greenhouse effect, and so forth, you had a warm period, warmer than now. And it also means that polar bears and the penguins and all these other species that are supposedly threatened got through a warmer period very recently. They could not have then regenerated themselves. They did not become extinct, and they won't this time. We've also got the Little Ice Age, right, around 1600, 1650. Go back and look at those interesting paintings by Bruegel, by the other Flemish masters, the frozen Thames, the ice, right? Think of somebody like Wordsworth, right? Writing about his experiences as a boy out ice skating. That's not exactly the Little Ice Age. That's a little bit later. But here's the idea. It's solar activity, sunspots, solar flares, solar wind, other forms of solar activity. Very little researched because no Malthusian Foundation to know about this stuff. They want to say, give us climate scientists who are going to tell you it's all man-made because of CO2. To be a climate scientist is to be a charlatan. If you're a historian, as I am, being a historian, you're not committed to some point of view or other. But to be a climate scientist means that you have bought the entire rap about anthropogenic, global warming, carbon tax, cap and trade, all this other stuff, right? That's what you're there for. That's your meal ticket. Now, in the case of the medieval warm period, it's harder to determine the sunspot activity because they were not so much observed. They can be extrapolated in retrospect. But the idea is this. The Maunder minimum of sunspot activity around 1600 correlates with the Little Ice. So the lower the sunspot activity, the minima, those are the cold times. For example, in 1800 or so, the Dalton minimum is cold. So that's Wordsworth, right? And then the Spörer minimum around 1500, that's also cold. We are now living in the modern super maximum of sunspots. So we're living in a time of intense solar activity. This, which probably peaked around 1950 to 1960. So there are cycles. There's a sunspot cycle of 11 years. And then there are these super cycles, which go over centuries, which are not understood because nobody wants to fund that research. And there are even things you can take this back further, right? The medieval warm period, okay. The Little Ice Age, also well known. How about the Arctic home in the Vedas, right? This Tilak, right? The Indian author, because of evidence in the Veda literature, he goes back to a time where a civilization was centered in the Arctic Ocean, and they saw the stars going around them, not so much rising and setting, but going around them in circles, because that's what it looks like more or less when you're at the or near the North Pole, right, with some changes. The other question then becomes the 350, right, this McKibben. Oh, McKibben, 350. So he says if the concentration goes over 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, then you're in big trouble. Then you have the end of the world. All right, let's look at the historical facts, right? And again, we climate scientists, we need good historians because this, you can even find this stuff in the documents. Specifically, the way that they get these CO2 figures is to get ice cores. They go to a glacier, they drill way down, and they estimate this, well, this ice is here, this has been here for 1,000 years or 500 years or whatever it is. Problem with that ice is it's been melting, it's been freezing, melting, refreezing, melting, freezing, moving, cracking, gas comes in, gas released, all this other stuff. Not reliable. Let's go to the masterful German chemists and other continental scientists, Italian, French, of the 19th century or the 20th century. So what do we find? The line that is proposed by the Intergovernmental Council on Climate Change, these charlatans whose emails were exposed in advance of their last confab, we find that the CO2 parts per million got up to about 470 between 1940 and 1945, and it was around 430 during the period 1935 to 1940, and then it peaked again at about 430 between 45 and 50. Okay? So the idea that there's a linear, gradual increase is not borne out by actual chemical observations of how much CO2 there's in the air. People were interested. They kept records. You don't need ice cores. The reason they want ice cores is because the amount of gas left in the ice core, the CO2, has been reduced. So it looks like it's increased now. The article on this is Zbigniew Jaworowski, a Polish continental scientist. Once again, ice core data show no carbon dioxide increase. Yes, Jaworowski. And he also is associated with Diplom-Biologe Ernst Georg Beck of the Marianne-Schule in Freiburg, Germany in August of 2006. 180 years of accurate CO2 air gas analysis by chemical methods. Chemicals, not this crazy drilling into the ice. Now, concerning Scotland, we salute the Scotch people. You did the right thing. I also compliment George Galloway. He did yeoman service. I'd love to get him on here. If he hears this, please write me an email. What was being offered was not independence. Independence was never on the table. What was on the table was a Bantustan, local control, community control, autogestion, parochialism, particularism, counterinsurgency. They would have kept the Queen, kept the Bank of England, kept the European Union, kept NATO, kept the IMF, if they were lucky, and more likely, chaos. Now, a lot of Scots were voting against the Tories, against the Thatcherites. Good. But take a look at that Scottish National Party, that pile of rotten fish, salmon and sturgeon, and rotten. Here's what you need. We're told the BBC in the night of that vote was saying, okay, now we got to have an English parliament. We got to have more parliamentary cretinism. People are sick of parliamentary cretinism. The BBC says the answer to the crisis is more parliamentary cretinism. Sorry. What we need is to seize control of the Bank of England, force them to stop serving the City of London, break the power of the City of London, and issue a credit or buy bonds, same thing, to the amount of £2 trillion, I would say, with the goal of creating 5 million new productive jobs to bring British Isles as a whole to full employment and rising standards of living for the first time since 1945. Centerpiece of the program, tax the City of London. 1% turnover tax, Tobin tax, Euro Tobin, City of London sales tax, Wall Street sales tax, not Robin Hood tax. I don't think that works even in Britain. People should comment if they want to. Get yourself up to the international standard of the social safety net, people. We said people, Scots on TV here saying, I lived in continental Europe and the social safety net is much better. It is. So tax the City of London 1% and rebuild the National Health Service and the entire British social safety net. So if that's Scotland, that is otherwise that different pigsty.